As we know, Israel and Hamas, they have signed that peace proposal that was brought forth by President Trump. Now, turning now to some of this reporting, courtesy of the Associated Press. The first phase of his plan to pause fighting and release at least some hostages and prisoners. U.S. President Donald Trump saying Wednesday and announcing the outlines of the biggest breakthrough in months of that 2-year war. Hamas will be releasing all 20 living hostages in the coming days in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, while the Israeli military will begin a withdrawal from the majority of Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said on social media, quote, "With God's help, we will bring them all home." Hamas said separately that the deal would ensure the withdrawal of Israeli troops, as well as allow for the entry of aid and exchange of hostages and prisoners. Joining us now to discuss this even further is Goren. He is a research analyst and also an editor at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Aaron, good morning.
Thanks for having me on, Carol.
Thank you so much for joining. So continuing with this, it was such major breaking news just last night. But let's break down a little bit this first phase, because that's what they have agreed to right now. The first phase, the release of those 20 hostages in exchange for some Palestinian prisoners being held in Israel. Aaron, what else is part of that deal?
Yeah, so this is a huge win for President Trump, basically to get the world, both the Arab world and the Western world, around this 20-point plan is huge and pretty much unprecedented. What we're seeing now within this first phase is what everyone wants to see, and that's the release of all 48 remaining hostages. 20 of the living hostages are meant to be released by Hamas within the next couple of days. It's unclear exactly when that takes place. Israel still needs to ratify the agreement within Knesset, which is like their parliament. And so Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is saying that the ceasefire actually hasn't taken effect despite Egyptian media reporting. I think that ratification is due to go forward at 5 p.m. Israel time, so that's 10 a.m. our time. But anyways, 20 of the living hostages, and then the remaining 28 hostages who are unfortunately deceased will be released or recovered in that case within the next few days as well. And that would just bring the most immediate and final closure to their families. But it's really great to see. I mean, it's something that hasn't been accomplished in the past throughout 2 years of war. Previous administrations just couldn't get it done, and President Trump got it over the line. So it's a huge win for President Trump, a huge win for Israel, and a huge win for democratic-loving nations and people around the world.
And I do want to talk about really President Trump's role in this entire situation. As you mentioned, this war, we just passed the 2-year mark. So there have been ongoing discussions since it started to kind of get to this point. But we'll get to that in just a moment. First, you mentioned that ratification still has to happen later on today, 10 a.m. Eastern time, 5 p.m. local time there in Israel. Any challenges that could arise there that could maybe, falter this entire deal?
I don't think so. I think we're set to see this thing over the line, and the ratification is just a formality at this point. So I don't see any issues with Israel approving this deal. Everyone in Israel wants to see these hostages home, and there's never been a better opportunity than now.
And now let's turn to President Trump, because this was a 20-point peace plan proposal that he did bring forth. So a few days later, we do see that we have at least the first phase that has been agreed upon. Talk to me about some of the partnerships and some of the strategy that President Trump had along with his administration to get this deal through and to get all of these sides to really agree on it.
That's right. So from the meeting in the White House about a week and a little bit ago between President Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, it was clear that these things were going to move quickly. And that was even more clear when 8 Arab and Muslim nations signed this letter of approval, this statement of approval of the 20-point plan. And that really put some diplomatic pressure on Hamas. Now, along with that, you have the IDF's military pressure in basically encircling Gaza City, where that's essentially one of the last bastions of Hamas's strength in Gaza. So between that military pressure and that diplomatic pressure, you basically had unprecedented and sort of unified pressure being mounted on Hamas to get this deal done. And Israel certainly comes out on top any way you cut it. The IDF basically makes a slight withdrawal backwards. I think it still controls about 53% of Gaza, even with this withdrawal. And that's before the hostages are released. Any subsequent withdrawals after that by the IDF only come after all the hostages are released as proposed in Trump's plan. So it's just a fantastic deal. And this diplomatic and military pressure really forced Hamas to get it over the line and accept this deal.
I want to turn now to this, a social media post by Fox News correspondent Trey Yingst, where he says this: President Trump announces that Israel and Hamas signed off on the first phase of the peace plan. Israeli media reports that living hostages are expected to be released on Sunday. The IDF will pull back forces to agreed upon lines. If things go as planned, the war is ending. But Aaron, there were some talks a few days ago leading up to this deal finally being reached, at least that first phase, that said it was going to be a bit difficult to really locate some of these hostages with this war going on and the destruction that's been there in Gaza. So can you explain to us some of the challenges of even keeping record and making sure that all of these hostages, both the ones who are living and the ones who unfortunately have passed, how will they actually get back and be accounted for?
Yeah, so that will be accomplished through international organizations such as the Red Cross in this case. But the issue with mainly the deceased hostages, to my knowledge, I'm pretty sure everyone or Hamas knows where the 20 living hostages are, because those are their essential last bargaining chips, or they were before this deal went through. But as far as the deceased hostages go, on October 7, 2023, when Hamas led these atrocities in southern Israel, it wasn't just Hamas. It was numerous terrorist groups. There are at least 7 different terrorist groups operating in the Gaza Strip that invaded southern Israel on October 7th. Along with this, you have everyday Palestinians that were keeping hostages throughout this war. So between that and the chaos of the war, locating these deceased hostages may be a challenge, but I'm also seeing that there will be an international task force basically put together in the case that Hamas can't locate the deceased hostages, to sort of go in alongside the international organizations like the Red Cross and locate these hostages and bring closure to the families.
You mentioned something that I want to touch on a little bit more within that last answer, which is these hostages being considered their bargaining chip, at least for Hamas in this entire war. Can you explain to our viewers what makes this particular time so different, that they are willing to essentially give up that bargaining chip?
Yeah, so that remains to be seen, and I don't honestly have the answer. Could they have been promised some role in governing a future Gaza Strip? Could they have been promised some role by the Palestinian Authority? It's unclear now what made Hamas really release this last bargaining chip of theirs. But for certain, it has something to do with this diplomatic pressure that was put on by all these Arab states, mainly Turkey and Qatar and Egypt, alongside the United States. They just haven't faced that level of diplomatic pressure before, and I think that played a huge role in their decision to accept this deal.
And then Aaron Goren, just finally here, one more question, because we have seen, and I just want to let our viewers know that the shot that we have live there out of Gaza continues to switch. They're giving us all different vantage points. But Aaron, this has happened before, in the fact that we have kind of reached these stages where, yes, it seems we have a plan, it's going to go through, but then it falls through at some point. Can you just walk us through the last couple of years when we have reached these deals? What happened that they fell through every time?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I always say, and I think this is a saying in Hebrew as well, is it's not over until it's over, and it's really never over. So until the hostages are in Israeli territory on Saturday or Sunday or whenever that release takes place, I won't be resting easy. I know there'll be a level of apprehension in the air. In the past, essentially what has happened is, for example, in January, these hostage releases and prisoner exchanges went down in phases, as opposed to right now, when they're all the hostages are supposed to be released in one phase, alongside these Palestinian prisoners in exchange. So what happened were there were multiple phases throughout around 6 weeks. And then towards the end of those phased releases, there were supposed to be more negotiations led by Steve Witkoff. And those basically fell through because Hamas was not willing to give up its arms or release the last remaining hostages. Back then, the situation on the battlefield was not what it is today. And I think that, that applies some pressure to the group militarily to go through with this deal. Back then, Israel hadn't fought its war against Iran, the historic backers of Hamas. Israel had, just depleted Hezbollah, but it wasn't really clear that Israel was really going on this sort of Middle East-wide, military depletion tour where they hit the Houthis hard, they hit Iran itself hard. So the situation on the battlefield changed, and I'm very optimistic about this plan going through and not falling through like previous plans have.
Aaron Goren, a research analyst and editor for the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. We appreciate your time on this Thursday morning. We're going to be watching out for this. Obviously going to be happening through the next few days, whether we see the hostages being released finally and hopefully a complete end to this war. You take care.
Thank you.